This is my true story. 30 years ago, a storm took my only son away. His small fishing boat vanished in the waves, and they never found his body. I buried an empty coffin and lived the rest of my life listening to the wind, waiting for a sound that never came. But last week, at midnight, someone knocked on my door, and when I opened it, my heart stopped. Before I tell you what I saw, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so more people can hear my story. 30 years ago, the storm came without warning. The sky had been clear that morning, the kind of blue that made the ocean look calm, almost harmless. My son left early with his small fishing boat, the one we built together from old timber and dreams. He said he'd be back before sunset. I remember standing by the pier, watching the boat shrink into the distance until it became a speck against the water. The waves were quiet then, gentle, easy. But by noon, the horizon darkened. The air turned heavy and the birds vanished inland. The radio warned of rough weather coming from the east, but we had seen storms before. We thought this would pass too. It didn't. By evening, the wind had become a roar. Trees bent like they were praying. The sky turned the color of bruised steel, and thunder rolled through the valley like the sound of something breaking. I stood by the window, clutching the edge of the curtain, waiting for headlights, for footsteps, for any sign of him. My wife kept calling his name into the wind, her voice lost every time lightning split the sky. I told her he'd be fine. I said he was strong, but every word tasted like fear. Around midnight, the first call came from the harbor. A broken transmission, a single sentence from the Coast Guard. We've lost sight of the vessel. That was the moment my heart began to die. The search started at dawn. I followed the rescue team to the shore, where the sand was covered in seaweed and driftwood. The waves kept crashing like they were trying to bury the truth. For 3 days they looked, helicopters, boats, divers, all scanning the endless gray water. Every hour that passed felt like another door closing. On the 4th day, a fisherman found something floating near the rocks. It was his jacket, torn, soaked, heavy with salt. The same one I gave him when he was 16. I remember holding it to my chest, hoping it was a mistake, hoping it wasn't his. But the initials on the tag said otherwise. That jacket was the only thing the ocean gave back. When they stopped searching, I didn't. For months, I walked the coastline every morning and every night. I spoke to the sea like it could hear me. I begged it to return him. I told it I'd give anything, everything, just to see him one more time. But the sea doesn't bargain. It only takes. I stood there through every season, spring rain, summer sun, autumn wind, but the water always looked the same, cold, silent, indifferent. The town moved on, but I stayed in that same rhythm of waiting. The police came one last time to tell us the search was officially over. They said the words no parent should ever hear. You should prepare for closure. But how do you close a wound that never stops bleeding? I buried an empty coffin a week later. The funeral was small. The pastor said he was in a better place. My wife cried so hard she couldn't stand. I didn't cry at all. My body didn't know how. I just stood there holding the folded flag they gave me. A small symbol for a big loss. The sky was clear that day, the calm after the storm. But peace never came. When everyone left, I stayed by that grave until the sun went down. I placed his old compass on the headstone, the one he used to carry in his pocket whenever he went fishing. I whispered, "Find your way home." That was all I said. I didn't know that home would stop feeling like home after that. Every night since then, I've heard the storm again. Not in the sky, but in my heart. The same wind, the same waves, the same waiting. 30 years have passed, and I can still taste the salt in the air when I think of that night. It never left me. Maybe it never will. After that night, nothing was ever the same. The house that once felt warm turned cold and hollow, like the wind had moved in and made a home inside the walls. My wife stopped speaking within a month. She would sit by the window for hours, staring toward the sea as if he might still walk up the shore, dripping wet and smiling like before. I used to bring her tea, but she never drank it. The cup would go cold beside her, untouched, like everything else in this house. I tried to talk about other things, about weather, groceries, neighbors. But words felt pointless when the person you want to talk to isn't there to hear them. I knew she was breaking, and I couldn't stop it. We had been married for 40 years when she died. The doctors said her heart was weak, but I knew the truth. It wasn't her heart that failed. It was hope. Hope can keep a person alive for a long time, but once it runs out, even the strongest body gives up. I buried her beside his empty grave, under the same tree where we used to have picnics. I carved both their names into the stone myself because I couldn't afford anything fancy. I remember sitting there after the funeral, the shovel still in my hand, staring at two names that made my world once feel whole. The sea was calm that day, almost too calm, like it was pretending to sleep. I didn't say a prayer. I just whispered their names and walked home alone. After that, the days turned into copies of each other. I'd wake up, make coffee for two, forget, and pour the second cup down the sink. The radio played in the background, but I never really listened. The sound of the ocean was enough. My house became a museum of what used to be: his fishing boots by the door, her knitting bag on the chair, photos that had begun to fade under the sunlight. Every corner was a reminder of what I lost. I couldn't throw anything away. I told myself that if I kept their things here, maybe their souls would stay close. Maybe they'd find their way back. Sometimes I'd walk down to the pier where the fishermen still worked. They'd nod, say good morning, and go on about their day. No one mentioned him anymore, but I could see it in their eyes. Pity. That quiet, heavy pity people give you when they don't know what to say. I hated it, but I understood. People forget your name after a few years. They move on, build new memories, raise new children. But grief doesn't move on. It roots itself in your bones and grows there. It becomes part of you, like your heartbeat. I stopped celebrating birthdays. I stopped counting years. The calendar lost its meaning. Seasons passed, but I didn't feel them anymore. I lived in the same rhythm. Wake, remember, wait, sleep. The sound of thunder was enough to stop my breath even decades later. Every time a storm rolled in, I'd stand by the window again, hand on the glass, staring out into the rain. I'd tell myself it wasn't happening again, that he was long gone. But my body never listened. It remembered. My chest would tighten, my pulse would race, and for a moment I'd hear him calling my name again through the wind. Then the storm would pass, and I'd be left with silence. Always silence. Sometimes I thought about leaving, selling the house, moving inland. But where would I go? The sea took everything I loved, yet it's the only thing that still connects me to them. Every sound, every smell, every wave reminds me of their voices. To anyone else, the ocean is endless. To me, it's a graveyard that never stops breathing. I walk the beach every Sunday, slow, careful, listening. I still talk to him sometimes. I tell him about the world now, how cars are faster, how buildings are taller, how I'm older. I don't expect an answer, but sometimes the wind shifts suddenly, and I tell myself it's him. I've learned to live with ghosts, the kind that don't scare you but stay close enough to hurt. My wife's photo is still on the nightstand. My son's jacket still hangs by the door. The smell of salt still lingers in the air. Life didn't end that night, but it stopped being alive. I didn't die. I just stayed behind. Years passed like waves, slow, repeating, each one carrying the same ache. The house stopped aging, almost as if it froze in time with me. Dust gathered in corners, but I left it there. It made the rooms feel lived in, even though no one lived here anymore. My son's room remained the same. The blue curtains his mother sewed were still hanging by the window. The model ships he built as a boy still lined the shelf, their sails yellowed with time. His bed stayed made, the same blanket folded neatly at the foot, as if he'd come home any minute and complain that it was too tight, just like he always did. I used to open his window every morning, let the air in, just to keep it from feeling like a tomb. But it was in every way that mattered. A tomb built out of memory. The neighbors grew older too, then one by one, they moved away or passed on. The kids who used to play in the street now had children of their own. Sometimes they'd wave when they visited, polite but distant, like they didn't want to look too long at the old man who never left the shore. I became part of the landscape, like the mailboxes, like the gulls, like the sea itself. No one asked questions anymore. They'd stopped long ago. The story of my son was just another local legend by then. People whispered it to tourists. The fisherman's boy who vanished in the storm, the father who never left the house after. Some said they'd seen lights out at sea, others said they'd heard his voice on the wind. I never corrected them. Sometimes lies are kinder than truth. Inside, my days followed the same quiet rhythm. I'd wake before sunrise, sit at the kitchen table, and make 2 cups of coffee. One stayed untouched, like always. I'd turn on the radio, but I never listened to the news. The voices were too alive, too far from mine. Then I'd walk down to the shore, the same path every morning, the same rocks, the same tide pools. I knew every grain of sand, every shift in the wind. The sea was the only thing that stayed. It was my punishment and my comfort. When it was calm, I could almost feel peace. When it raged, it felt honest, a mirror of my insides. At night, I sat by the window with the lamp off, staring into the dark. I didn't look for him anymore, not really. I just waited out of habit. Waiting had become who I was. Some nights, when lightning flashed in the distance, I'd whisper his name, soft, almost embarrassed. It felt foolish, but I did it anyway. There was always a small part of me that thought, what if? What if the sea didn't take him? What if he'd found land somewhere far away? What if he was alive, living quietly, just like me? Those thoughts kept me breathing, even when I didn't want to. 30 years of waiting doesn't feel like years. It feels like one long season. Gray skies, cold coffee, creaking floors, and the sound of wind finding every crack in the house. I stopped keeping calendars. I stopped answering letters. The world moved too fast. People talked about computers, wars, cities I'd never see. But I was stuck in 1993, the year the storm took him. Every gust of wind that hit the windows reminded me of that night. Every drop of rain on the roof felt like the sea knocking to remind me it still owned something of mine. Then last week, everything changed. I woke up in the middle of the night to silence, a strange, heavy silence that didn't belong here. The kind that makes your skin tighten, that makes the air thick. It wasn't the wind or the sea. It was something else. I got up, walked through the dark hallway, and for the first time in years, I felt something move through the house. Not memory, not loneliness, but presence. Real, solid, alive. My hands trembled. The clock read midnight. Then came 3 knocks at the door. Slow, heavy, familiar. The kind of knock that echoes inside your chest instead of your ears. I froze. For a long time, I didn't move. I thought it was the wind. But the wind doesn't knock. It only howls. When the second knock came, I knew. Every bone in my body recognized that sound, that rhythm. 30 years vanished in a heartbeat. I walked to the door, heart hammering, every step heavier than the last. The storm had returned. Not outside, but inside me. The first knock was soft enough that I thought I imagined it. I had been half asleep in my chair, the same one by the window where I always sat when the storms rolled in. The wind had been howling off the coast for hours, and the rain was coming down in long, slanted lines. It had the same rhythm as that night 30 years ago. I looked toward the door, but I didn't move. The second knock came a few seconds later. Louder this time, slow and heavy, like someone pressing their hand against the wood before letting it fall. I sat up, my chest tightening. Nobody visits an old man this late. Not here, not in weather like this. When the third knock came, it shook the frame. My first thought was that it might be a branch or some loose panel caught by the wind. But something in the sound felt deliberate, too measured to be random. 3 times. Always 3. The same way my son used to knock when he came home late as a boy, laughing softly so he wouldn't wake his mother. My body froze. It was a sound my ears hadn't heard in decades, yet they remembered it instantly. I whispered his name without realizing it. My voice cracked like dry wood. The house felt colder all of a sudden, like the air itself was holding its breath. I reached for the lamp but didn't turn it on. The darkness made everything quieter, slower. I listened for footsteps outside, but there were none. Just rain hitting the porch roof and the sound of the waves crashing somewhere beyond the hill. I stood up slowly, my knees stiff, my hands trembling the way they always do now. The floor creaked under me as I walked toward the door. Every step echoed through the house, and each one felt heavier than the last. My heart was racing in a way it hadn't in years. The feeling was familiar. Fear, yes, but also something else. Hope. The kind of hope that hurts to feel. When I reached the door, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the knob. The rain was hitting harder now, streaking down the glass panes. I could see a shadow outside, faint, almost hidden by the stormlight. It moved slightly, then went still. My breath caught in my throat. For a long moment, I couldn't move. I was scared, not of what was out there, but of what it could mean. If it was him, how could that be? If it wasn't, then who else would know how to knock like that? I felt like the world had gone quiet except for the beating of my heart. I turned the handle slowly, my fingers shaking so badly I could hardly keep hold of it. The door opened with a long, tired groan. Wind rushed in, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of salt and rain. Lightning flashed across the horizon, and for a split second the yard lit up like daylight. That's when I saw him. Standing there, on the porch, drenched in silver light. My son. Or something that looked exactly like him. My knees almost gave out. His face was older somehow, but untouched by time. His hair was still dark, his skin pale from the stormlight, his eyes the same deep color I used to see in the mirror when I was young. He didn't speak. He just stood there, silent, looking at me the way a dream looks back when you start to wake up. My voice broke as I said his name. It came out small, fragile, like a word not meant for the living anymore. He didn't answer. He didn't even move. I took one step forward, expecting him to vanish, but he stayed. The light flickered again, and I saw it clearly. The scar above his eyebrow. The one he got when he fell off his bike at 12. The same one I'd kissed goodnight 100 times. It was him. My boy. My blood. My past. The wind blew between us, pulling at my robe, whistling through the cracks of the porch. He didn't seem to feel it. His clothes were dry, even as the rain poured harder around him. The smell of the ocean clung to him, clean but cold. I wanted to reach out, but my hand stopped halfway. Something about the way he stood, too still, too quiet, made my stomach twist. His eyes were calm, almost peaceful, but there was something missing in them. Something that didn't belong to this world anymore. We stood there, face to face, both silent, both breathing the same air that suddenly felt borrowed. My heart felt like it might break through my chest. I didn't know if I was dreaming or dying or both. All I knew was that after 30 years of waiting, he was back. And nothing in the world could have prepared me for what came next. I couldn't move. My hand stayed frozen on the door, fingers trembling against the cold wood. The rain was still falling, but I couldn't hear it anymore, only the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My son stood there, inches from me, and yet it felt like he was miles away. I wanted to speak, to reach out, to make sure this wasn't some cruel dream. But my throat closed up. My voice had forgotten how to form his name. For 30 years, I had whispered it to the sea, to the sky, to the empty walls of this house. And now, the name I'd spent half my life calling had finally come home, standing on my porch like time had never passed. His eyes met mine, and that was when my chest began to ache. It was the same face I remembered, only softer somehow, untouched by years. Not aged, not changed, as if he had stepped straight out of 1993. The same lines, the same shape, the same scar over his left brow. I had prepared myself to see an older man if I ever saw him again. Maybe gray-haired, maybe with a family of his own. But not this. Not the same boy I buried in memory. My hand lifted on its own, trembling, and I reached forward until my fingers brushed his cheek. It was cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from the rain. Something deeper. Like stone left in shade. My hand pulled back fast, but my heart didn't. I whispered, "Where have you been?" But the words didn't sound like mine. He didn't answer. He blinked slowly, like the question didn't make sense. The porch light flickered above us, buzzing in the wind. Water ran down his coat, but his face was dry. I looked at his feet. No puddles beneath him, no wet footprints leading up to the steps. Just dry boards, even with the storm raging around us. My stomach twisted, but I couldn't look away. He opened his mouth like he wanted to speak, but no sound came out. Just a long breath that turned white in the cold air. The air around us began to change, heavier, colder, thick with something that felt like memory, the kind that presses down on your shoulders until you forget how to stand. I stepped back slightly, holding on to the doorframe. He took one slow step forward, his shoes making no sound. I should have been afraid, but I wasn't. I felt something stronger than fear. Disbelief mixed with love. The kind of love that makes you ignore what you know to be true. I whispered again, "It's really you." This time, he nodded. Just once. Lightning flashed, lighting his face again, and in that second, I saw tears. They weren't falling, but they shimmered in his eyes, caught somewhere between here and gone. My own eyes burned. I wanted to ask so many things. Where did you go? Why didn't you come back? What kept you away for so long? But all I managed was, "Are you cold?" He shook his head slowly, almost sadly. His lips moved like he wanted to say something, but no words came. I stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in," I whispered. He didn't move at first. The rain kept falling behind him, and the air seemed to tremble between us. Then, slowly, he crossed the threshold. The moment he stepped inside, the wind outside stopped. Dead still. No sound, no rain. Just silence. The kind that hums in your bones. He looked around the room, his eyes drifting over the pictures on the wall, the old furniture, the coat rack where his jacket still hung after 30 years. I watched him closely. He didn't touch anything. He just stared, quiet and calm, like someone walking through a dream they once had. I followed his gaze to the photo of him and his mother by the dock. His eyes softened when he saw it. For a brief second, I thought I saw a faint smile, then it vanished. I didn't know what to do next. My hands were still shaking. I asked him if he wanted to sit, if he wanted something to eat, something warm. He turned to me slowly, like the words took a while to reach him, and then he nodded. I walked to the kitchen, my legs weak, my heart pounding. I poured him tea, though I don't know why. He hadn't spoken a word. When I turned back, he was standing in the same spot, staring at the chair like he wasn't sure it was meant for him. He finally sat down, his hands resting on the table, fingers pale and still. The light flickered again. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far off, soft this time, like a voice fading away. I sat across from him, afraid to blink. He was here, my boy, my son, and yet every part of me whispered that something about this wasn't right. Something about this moment wasn't from this world. For a long time, we sat in silence. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the wall clock, slow, steady, each tick cutting through the air like a heartbeat I no longer trusted. My son's hands rested flat on the table, still and pale, and his eyes stayed on the cup of tea in front of him. He didn't drink it. He just stared at the steam rising, watching it twist and fade as if the smoke carried memories he was trying to read. I watched him too, afraid that if I looked away, he'd vanish again. Every few seconds, I blinked just to make sure he was still there. Finally, he looked up at me. His eyes were strange, soft, but distant, like they were looking through me instead of at me. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost like it had to travel from far away. "I woke up on a shore," he said. The words came out flat, not as an explanation, but as a fact. My breath caught in my chest. He hadn't spoken in 30 years, yet his voice hadn't aged a day. I wanted to reach for him, to hold his hand, but I couldn't move. I just listened. He continued, slow, careful. It wasn't here. It wasn't anywhere I knew. He paused, his gaze flickering toward the window where lightning flashed faintly across the sky. The storm never ended for me, he said. It just moved slower. I didn't understand. My lips parted, but no sound came. He kept going, his voice low, almost like he was reciting something remembered rather than lived. The sea took me under, but I didn't drown. I opened my eyes, and there was light below the waves, white and endless. I thought it was heaven, but it wasn't. He stopped for a moment, his eyes falling to his hands. They were trembling slightly now, though his face stayed calm. I was somewhere between, he whispered. Not alive. Not gone. The words pressed against the walls like the air itself was listening. I felt cold all over, the kind of cold that starts deep in your chest and crawls outward. What do you mean? I managed to say. He looked up again, and I saw something shift in his face, a flicker of sadness, or maybe shame. There's a place the storm keeps, he said. A place it doesn't let go of what's remembered. I frowned, confused. Remembered? He nodded. The ones who are still remembered, he said softly. The ones whose names are still spoken. They don't drift away. The storm carries them until it's time. I didn't know what to say. My throat was dry, my hands gripping the edge of the table. He leaned back slightly, looking toward the doorway, his eyes tracing the hall that led to his old room. It's time, he said quietly, because you never stopped waiting. Something inside me cracked. I had spent 3 decades whispering his name into the sea, keeping his memory alive like a candle that refused to die. I had never stopped waiting. And now, sitting in front of me, was the impossible proof that love, or maybe obsession, could pull something back that shouldn't return. I wanted to believe it was him, all of him, but a small part of me, the part that had seen too much loss, whispered that this wasn't a gift, it was a debt. He smiled faintly, almost kindly, and said, I heard you. His voice softened with each word. All those nights by the window, all the prayers. The sea carries sound, you know, every call, every cry. I heard you. His words felt heavy, like stones dropped into deep water. I wanted to ask how he could still be the same, how he could come back untouched by years. But when I looked at his face, I saw the truth there. He hadn't lived those 30 years. He had passed through them like a shadow through fog. I asked him quietly, Where have you been all this time? He lowered his eyes. With the storm, he said. It doesn't let go of what's unfinished. Lightning flashed again, bright enough to light the whole room. For that brief second, I saw something shimmer over his skin, not water, not light. Something else, something almost transparent, like air bending around him. When the light faded, he looked normal again. But I knew. My son was back. But not the way people come back. Not from a place any map could show. He turned toward the window, his voice fading to a whisper. It's not forever, he said. When the storm calls again, I have to go. His words froze my blood. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't even blink. I just sat there, watching the boy I lost 30 years ago tell me that he'd have to leave again. Outside, thunder rumbled, low, distant, and steady, like the sea itself was answering him. He didn't speak for a while after that. He just sat there with his eyes on the window, his reflection faint against the glass as lightning rolled through the sky. I didn't press him. I was afraid to. Some stories you can feel before you hear them, the kind that come with a weight you can't lift once they're spoken. When he finally began to talk again, his voice was slower, steadier, like he was remembering each word as it formed. It started with the noise, he said quietly. Not thunder. Not waves. It was like a hum beneath everything, low, endless. When the storm took the boat, I thought I'd drowned. I remember the water pulling me down, but it wasn't dark. It was white, bright, like being inside lightning itself. I could feel my heart pushing against my ribs. He continued, his voice almost calm. There were others there. Not many, just shadows at first, moving through the light. Some were crying, some were quiet. All of them looked lost. He paused and rubbed his hands together like they were cold even here in the warmth of the house. It wasn't water anymore. It wasn't air either. It was something in between. Time didn't move right. I tried to count the seconds, but it didn't matter. It was all the same moment, over and over. I wanted to interrupt, to tell him to stop, but I couldn't. His words had their own gravity. Then, he said softly, I saw the ship. His eyes lifted, unfocused, like he was seeing it again. It came out of the light. No sails, no sound, just white wood and silence. The people there called it the vessel. They said it moves with the storm, always waiting for names the world hasn't forgotten. He swallowed hard before continuing. They told me the sea keeps memories, that when you speak someone's name in grief, the sound travels through every drop of water in the world. It reaches the vessel, and those who are remembered stay aboard until the storm returns them. My stomach turned cold. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. You're saying... I started, but the words died in my throat. He nodded before I finished. I was there because of you, he said simply. Because you never stopped calling me. The storm listens when a heart doesn't let go. Lightning flashed again, and I could see the shine in his eyes. He wasn't crying, but something in him was breaking as he spoke. At first, I thought it was a dream, he said. The vessel had no crew, no sound, just light and wind. We floated through places that didn't look real, skies beneath the ocean, clouds that moved like waves. Sometimes I'd see faces in the distance, people waiting, whispering. Some faded, the ones no one remembered. He paused. I waited too. I didn't know how long. I only knew one thing. I could still feel you. He said the name of the vessel again, the white vessel. It made the air in the room seem colder, heavier. When it moves, he said, you don't see where it goes. You just know it's closer to home. And when the storm rises again in the world of the living, it opens a path for us, for the ones still remembered. He looked at me then, straight in the eyes, and I saw something that didn't belong to this life. That's why I'm here, he whispered. Because the storm came again. Because you never stopped waiting. My body felt weak. My throat burned with tears I couldn't let out. I wanted to believe him, and I did. But belief came with terror. How long? I managed to ask. How long can you stay? He looked down at his hands. Until the tide changes, he said. Until morning. For a while, we said nothing. I could hear the faint rumble of thunder far away, and I realized it wasn't fading. It was circling, waiting. The storm wasn't gone. It was watching us, holding its breath like I was. He stood up then, slowly, like he was still getting used to being solid again. I wanted to see home, he said quietly. One more time. He walked toward the hallway where his old room was. His steps were silent. My heart followed each one. As he disappeared into the dark, I whispered after him, "Rest, my boy." But I wasn't sure if he heard me, or if he ever really needed to. That night, after he went into his room, I didn't move for a long time. The house felt alive again, not in a warm way, but in a way that made every sound matter. The clock ticked louder. The wind outside pressed harder against the windows. Even the floor seemed to breathe beneath me. I sat in the chair by the kitchen, staring down the hall at the small sliver of light glowing from under his door. My heart wanted to run to him, to sit beside him like I used to when he had nightmares as a child. But something inside me, something old and wordless, kept me still. I was afraid that if I opened that door, I'd see something I couldn't unsee. Hours passed. I don't know when the thunder stopped, or if it ever did. The house was quiet except for the wind and that faint hum again, the same one he'd described from the storm, low and steady, like the sea was whispering through the walls. I told myself it was the pipes, the old house settling, anything normal. But then I heard it. A voice. Faint. Gentle. Humming. It was a tune I hadn't heard in 30 years. The lullaby his mother used to sing when he was small. The same song she sang the night before the storm took him. The sound came from his room. I stood up, my knees shaking. The hallway stretched long and dark before me, the wooden floor cold against my bare feet. Each step echoed in the silence, slow and hollow. The humming stopped the moment I reached the door. My hand hovered above the knob. I wanted to knock, but I couldn't. I pushed the door open slowly. The light inside flickered once, twice, and then dimmed. His bed was empty. For a moment I thought he'd gone outside. Maybe to the shore, maybe to think. But then I saw his coat still hanging on the chair, his shoes neatly by the door. The room was cold, colder than the rest of the house, like the air itself had been drained of life. His old toys were still on the shelf, his posters faded on the walls. The window was open slightly, the curtain fluttering in a slow, steady rhythm. I walked to it and looked out. The rain had stopped, but everything outside shimmered with a strange pale light. Moonlight maybe, but softer, almost unreal. The sea beyond the hill glowed faintly, white and endless. I whispered his name, but the air swallowed it. There was no answer. Only the hum again. Not from the room this time, but from somewhere far off, deep and low, like the ocean itself was singing. My hands trembled as I stepped back. The picture of him and his mother that always hung by his bed had fallen face down. I turned it over. The glass was cracked. I rushed through the house calling his name, my voice cracking against the walls, but no sound came back. Not a door creak, not a footstep, not even the wind. It was as if the whole world had paused. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The air outside was cold and still. The sky had cleared. No clouds, no thunder, just a wide, empty darkness. I called again, louder, desperate this time. But only the sea answered, quiet and calm, like nothing had happened. I went back inside, shaking, heart racing. His chair was still pulled out from the table, the teacup untouched, the surface of it cold. I sat down where he had been. My fingers brushed the spot where his hand had rested hours earlier, but there was no warmth left. Only a faint dampness, like sea mist. That's when I realized it. The faint smell of salt in the air, sharper than before, as if the ocean had come closer. For the rest of the night, I didn't move. I stayed in that chair until morning, eyes fixed on the doorway, waiting to see if he would come back again, the same way he had before. But dawn came quietly, and the house stayed still. The only proof he'd been there at all was the teacup and the faint sound of the lullaby still echoing somewhere deep inside my head. And then came the fear, not of losing him again, but of wondering if I had ever really gotten him back at all. Morning came without color. The light that crept through the windows was pale and thin, like it was too tired to reach the floor. I sat in the same chair all night, afraid to move, afraid that if I blinked too long, I'd find the whole thing had been a dream. The house was quiet again, that old familiar quiet that had been my only companion for decades. But something had changed. The air felt heavier. Every sound, every shadow, every breath reminded me that he had been here, or something that looked like him. I didn't know what to call it anymore. Miracle, curse, mercy. Maybe it was all three. I stood slowly, my knees stiff, my body aching from the long hours of stillness. His door was still open down the hallway. The faint smell of salt hung in the air, sharp and clean, like the ocean after rain. I walked toward it, half hoping, half dreading what I might find. The bed was empty, the covers untouched. The teacup was still on the table beside the chair. But what stopped me was the sound. Faint, distant, the slow dripping of water. I looked down. A trail of small, wet footprints led from his room to the front door. Bare feet, light, fading. They ended just before the porch, where the morning sun hit the floor. I stood there for a long time, staring at them. They were proof that he had been real, and yet, like everything else tied to the sea, they were already disappearing. I stepped outside. The air was cold, the wind carrying that faint hum again, but weaker now, like it was fading with the night. The world looked normal. Birds were moving again, the waves small and steady, the grass wet with dew. No storm, no thunder, no sign of what had happened. For a moment, I almost believed I'd imagined it all. But when I turned back toward the house, I saw his shoes by the door, the same old sneakers he used to wear as a boy, soaked through, dripping salt water onto the porch. That was when I felt it. Not fear this time, not even sadness. Just a deep, hollow ache, the kind that comes when your heart accepts what your mind still can't. I went inside and called the police, my voice shaking. I told them my son had come home. They asked for his name, his age. I said, "He's 30 years old." The line went silent for a moment. Then the officer said gently, "Sir, according to records, your son would be 51 now." I tried to explain, tried to tell him what I saw, but the more I spoke, the quieter his voice became. Finally, he said, "You've been alone a long time, sir. Maybe you dreamed it. Maybe it felt real." Then he wished me well and hung up. I sat with the phone still in my hand for a while, listening to the dial tone. That same flat, empty hum. I realized it sounded almost like the one my son had described, the hum beneath the storm. Maybe he had been trying to tell me that the world of the living and the world of the lost aren't as far apart as we think. Maybe they touch sometimes, just long enough for one to slip into the other before fading again. I spent the rest of the day cleaning the kitchen, anything to keep my hands moving. But the house didn't feel the same. The clock ticked louder, the floorboards creaked slower. The air was colder, even with the sun up. When I looked at the table, I saw his cup still sitting there, a thin ring of salt left at the bottom. I couldn't bring myself to wash it. I left it there, the way he'd left his room, untouched. That night, I sat by the window again, watching the horizon fade into darkness. For the first time in 30 years, I didn't feel alone, but I didn't feel whole either. Somewhere out there, beyond the waves, beyond the light, I knew the storm still waited. It had only borrowed him for a moment, only long enough to remind me that love never really dies. It just changes shape. When the wind rose again near midnight, I didn't flinch. I just closed my eyes and whispered his name, knowing that if the sea was listening, it would carry my voice back to wherever he was. And maybe, if the tide ever turned in my favor again, I'd hear his knock once more. But until then, the house would stay quiet, and I would wait. Not out of hope this time, but out of love. It's been a week since that night. The storm hasn't returned, but I still wake to the sound of wind that isn't there. The house feels different now, not empty, not full, just waiting. The chair by the window still faces the sea, the same as it always has. I sit there every morning, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that goes cold before I finish it. Sometimes I think I see movement along the horizon, a thin white shape gliding across the water. I tell myself it's just fog or a fishing boat or memory playing tricks. But deep down, I know better. Some storms don't end when the clouds clear. They stay, hiding beneath calm skies, carrying voices that were never meant to return. Every day, I look at the shoes by the door, his shoes, still damp from the salt. I tried to move them once, but my hands wouldn't do it. It felt wrong, like erasing proof that love had reached across time, even for just one night. The police never came back. The neighbors don't ask questions. People pass me on the street, nod politely, and keep walking. They don't know that the boy I buried without a body walked through that door and looked at me with eyes that still remembered the lullaby his mother used to sing. They don't know that grief can bend the world, that time listens when you whisper someone's name for long enough. They don't know that I touched his face, cold, real, impossible. At night, the silence feels heavier than it used to. It's not lonely anymore. It's something else, like the air is holding its breath, waiting for another knock. I keep the porch light on now. I tell myself it's in case the mailman comes early, but that's a lie. It's for him, for the storm, for whatever part of him still drifts between here and wherever the sea keeps its lost. Sometimes, when the wind shifts from the east, I hear that hum again, soft, low, almost like a heartbeat under the sound of the waves. It's faint, but it's there. When it comes, I close my eyes and whisper, "I'm still here." And for a moment, I swear the air answers back. I've stopped asking why. There's no comfort in questions. Some truths are too deep for language, too wide for reason. My boy came back to me, not to stay, but to remind me that he never really left. Maybe that's all love ever promises us. Not forever, but one more moment. One last chance to see, to speak, to forgive. When he stood on my porch that night, I felt fear, yes, but I also felt peace. Because even if he wasn't alive in the way I understood it, he was home. And home, I've learned, isn't a place that stands forever. It's the people who cross our doorways, no matter how briefly, and leave something behind that never fades. Sometimes I wonder if the sea will call for me too. If one night, when the tide is high and the wind moves through the fields like an old voice, I'll hear that knock again, 3 times, slow, heavy, familiar. And maybe when I open the door, it'll be him, standing there under the rain, smiling like he used to, ready to take me where storms go when they rest. Maybe then, the waiting will finally end. Until then, I keep the light on, the window open, the sea within reach. I walk to the shore every evening and whisper his name into the wind. The waves always answer, pulling back slow, soft, and kind, as if carrying my words somewhere they belong. I don't know if he hears me, but I think he does. The heart knows its own echoes. My son went missing in a storm 30 years ago. Last week, he walked through my door, and then the sea took him back. Final thought. Maybe some storms never end. They just return the ones we love long enough to remind us that love, even after death, still remembers the way home.